of new. Oh, thank you for that. So they instead, when they can't reach an agreement on the appropriations bills, they pass, again, continuing resolutions, um, also call them CRs. And these are just bills to extend funding at current levels for a time until Congress can agree to the actual funding bills to provide money for the federal government in the next fiscal year. So these CRs have been passed many times in recent years, and there are often multiple passed in a single fiscal year. So where are we now? So Congress has developed their appropriations bills, but they can't agree on them. And ultimately, there are big disagreements between the House and Senate and within the House Republican caucus as well on the overall spending levels. So the House, which is controlled by Republicans by a slim majority right now, they want budget cuts that are deeper than stipulated in a deal that was reached months back to raise the debt ceiling. And their current appropriations bills include these big cuts. On the other side, the Senate bills include higher levels of funding, and they adhere to the funding levels stipulated in that debt ceiling agreement. So ultimately, because the Senate at the end has to agree to these bills too, any final agreement is going to need to be bipartisan. And that right now is looking like it's going to be very difficult to do. So it's very unclear if they're even going to be able to agree on a CR to extend current funding levels before the deadline, which again is at the end of this month. So overall, NACD is generally supporting the levels of funding that the Senate bills have provided for our priorities, like conservation operations, non-point source pollution control grants, private forestry programs, watershed programs, all our different appropriations priorities. So what does it mean if Congress isn't able to pass a CR? So that's when the government would shut down. This isn't certain right now. Again, Congress has about a week to agree to and pass one of these continuing resolutions. But to be honest, right now, it is looking likely that they are going to shut down. Also, and I anticipate that we get questions to this effect, but it's also unclear if a CR isn't passed and the government shuts down, exactly how long a shutdown would last. In previous years, it's been anywhere from weeks to longer than that. So that's something that we just don't know at this time. So what would that mean for districts if the federal government shut down? So government agencies like USDA, of course, would be affected by a shutdown. During the last shutdown in particular, it started in 2018, government agencies like NRCS were able to partially continue operations. However, during the one before that, and I think the one before the 2018 shutdown was in 2013, NRCS shut down more completely and really did have to cease most operations. So I actually got a timely call from Undersecretary Aspey about an hour ago this morning. He communicated that NRCS still doesn't know what flavor of shutdown they're going to have at this point. So it could look like the 2018 shutdown, where NRCS was generally able to continue operations. Could also be something closer to the shutdown before that, where they really did have to shut down. And so that is probably the biggest question mark right now in terms of what a shutdown would look like. So we hope to get more information about that in the coming days. And we'll, of course, share that with you when we get any updates. I think it is, safe to prepare for the more difficult scenario where, NRCS and other agencies, have to shut down more completely. It's also important to note that a shutdown isn't just going to affect USDA and NRCS, would also affect, EPA operations, Department of the Interior operations, and sub-agencies within those, like the Fish and Wildlife Service, that districts work very closely with, and other agencies like the BLM. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So I think the most important thing that we would recommend district leaders do now is to make sure that they are communicating with their local NRCS offices to talk through shutdown procedures and contingency operations. And again, when we receive any more specific guidance from the department, we'll share that. There is a shutdown checklist that I know is posted on our website that we've shared in previous years. And we also got some confirmation that the information in that is for the most part still up to date. So that's something that we will make minor updates to and share. But in the event that NRCS and other agencies shut down completely, their resources that districts use will not be available. So, I know in many cases, district offices are co-located within NRCS offices. So those buildings would not be accessible. Things like vehicles would not be available, other office supplies. And then also things like important tools like the conservation desktop and other resources that are really important for program administration, like FSA data, also wouldn't be available to districts. So, existing contracts would stand, but reimbursements might be slow. And there are also some, exceptions for operations and programs that protect, things like life and property, and things that fall within that bucket will continue to operate on a more limited basis. But I will stop there and open it up for questions on the federal funding situation right now. Again, on the shutdown, our biggest piece of advice is to keep in touch with your local NRCS office. But with that, I will open it up for any questions that folks have. Doug, I saw your hand first.
Oh, good morning, Chris. It's still morning out here in the other Washington. Could you put the link to the NACD website in the chat for us?
I can, yeah. We are going to make a couple small changes to that document, and then we will be distributing it broadly.
Okay, within a couple days, I would expect something like that.
Yep. We're going to do that. I would think very soon.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Nice beard, by the way.
Thank you. Any other questions on the appropriations process or anything else that I just touched on? All right, well, we have plenty of other things to get to, so that is quite okay. Let me look at the chat. And I saw a question in the chat from Leanne about the shutdown, and she is right that again, a lot of district offices are co-located within NRCS offices, and if there is a more complete shutdown of NRCS, then those NRCS offices will not be accessible, unfortunately. All right, so I will launch into a Farm Bill update next. But again, if there are other questions that you think of on appropriations or the shutdown, please feel free to put those in the chat or shoot our team an email. We'll be happy to get back to you. So the Farm Bill. So while Congress is struggling to pass these appropriations bills, they're also struggling a bit to develop and pass a farm bill. To start, I do want to note that even though the 2018 Farm Bill expires at the same time that federal funding will, on the last day is on September 30th at the end of this month, NRCS conservation programs were reauthorized by the Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to them receiving a lot of new funding. So those will continue to function. And then also important to note that other programs, CRP is the other big conservation program that is administered by FSA. Those payments will be able to continue after the end of September without an extension or a new farm bill. And then other big USDA programs, crop insurance is permanently authorized. Commodity programs also wouldn't be affected for quite some time. And then, really the majority of the bigger USDA programs for producers wouldn't be impacted right away, which is really good news. Under normal circumstances, if we didn't see the Inflation Reduction Act passed, we would be in a very difficult spot because those NRCS conservation programs that we're so involved with would expire. So in that sense, we are in a really good position. So the first real pain point that that USDA and producers would see is what's known as a dairy cliff, and that if a farm bill or an extension isn't passed by the beginning of next year, it would trigger these arcane laws from the 30s and 40s, and basically it would make USDA take these dramatic steps to raise the price of milk and wheat and some other commodities. So that is going to be something that motivates Congress to pass at least an extension before the end of the calendar year. So where is Congress on the development of the actual bill? So both the House and the Senate are a bit behind. That can be attributed to a few different things. Congress, like we talked about before, is delayed in passing those appropriations bills to fund the federal government. And there are also some disagreements over, bigger policy decisions that I'll talk a little bit more about here in a bit. And then, both chambers have also cited issues in, delays in getting responses from the Congressional Budget Office on cost estimates that they're required to get on different policy proposals that they're developing for the Farm Bill. So it's kind of a storm of different things that's delaying Farm Bill development and consideration. The chairs of both the Senate and the House Ag committees, have publicly acknowledged these delays, and they're now shooting to pass a Farm Bill. I think they're both of their public statements. Their recent ones are shooting more for the end of the calendar year. And we've been told that we could see Farm Bill language, as early as next month. That is also subject to slip, but it's still possible. So the biggest challenges to Farm Bill passage seem to be those policy decisions that would require new funding, because folks know we're in a pretty tight budget environment right now, and that's really the whole crux of these big disagreements over the appropriations bills. But bigger priorities that are very important to important stakeholder groups and the congressional members themselves are things such as increasing reference prices, expanding crop insurance. And the biggest issue slash debate in the conservation title in particular is how to handle or not the IRA conservation funding that was provided a while back. And then other issues, a pretty long-standing one for farm bills has been SNAP. That has the potential to result in some disputes and delays if certain members try to make changes to that program through the farm bill. So those are just a few of the bigger things that could contribute to disagreements between the members and more delays. So right now, NACD, and this is really, we're in the same position as most other stakeholders at this point. We're kind of in a wait and see mode as the House and the Senate committees are privately writing their versions of the bill. Leading up to now, we've done a bunch of things to advocate for our priorities. So we've of course, our Farm Bill Task Force and Legislative Committee and our leadership and members, we've developed Farm Bill requests. We've communicated those requests to the committee. We've talked with them about some very specific things we'd like to see in a bill. We're offering feedback to the committees as it's requested, and again, we're now waiting to see what final language they come up with. And yeah, I would also note, and you all have heard me say this before, but our immediate past president, Michael Crowder, testified at a couple hearings over the past year and a half. And overall, I also did want to just plug that our members have been doing a really excellent job in advocating for both our Farm Bill priorities and our appropriations priorities and other policy requests that we have. Over the past month and a half in particular, we've had pretty large number of folks meet with congressional leaders in state, particularly over the August recess when members of Congress are back in their home states. And those folks did a really great job in advocating for our Farm Bill and again, other requests. Also want to thank, we had a really good participation in our fly-in this past March. That it did make a really big difference in emphasizing the importance of our priorities. Members from really all parts of the country got to hear local requests, and then they also of course communicated our national Farm Bill requests. So just want to thank folks for their continued engagement with congressional offices, and as folks have been doing a really good job, as those opportunities come up to meet with members of Congress, please reach out to our team, and we can ensure that you have the latest info. And we can of course provide things like talking points to help you in those meetings. So we do, have a pretty good sense of what the House and Senate Ag committees are looking to do, particularly in the conservation title of this upcoming Farm Bill. So the House, which is under Republican control, they are, in the middle of drafting their bill, and they're actually making pretty significant progress. So I'll go over just a few of the things that, from their perspective are big priorities. So one of the biggest things, and again, this is probably our biggest priority, is that they would like to bring the IRA conservation funding into the Farm Bill baseline. They would like to see the current climate sideboards that are attached to that funding removed. And then they're also looking, in that case, if they did that, they would look to likely spend some of it outside of the conservation title. They're also looking to do things like modernize the CRP program, make some, significant tweaks to make it more locally led, and do things like incentivize the enrollment of more marginal land. They are not looking to make super significant changes to EQIP and CSP. One of NACD's, I think, most important requests in those programs is that we are, pushing back against additional carve-outs within those programs that have been suggested by, groups and some members of Congress. House is also looking to bolster support for PL 566 and to streamline the program, which both those things are in line with NACD's requests. And then they're also looking at some other ideas. A new state grant program to support soil health initiatives is one thing that they're considering. They are looking to make reforms to the TSP program to make it more accessible. There's a lot of motivation to support precision agriculture. And then there's also some interest in improving and kind of updating the conservation practice standard system. And then over in the Senate, Senate leadership of the Ag Committee, they are open to integrating that IRA funding into the baseline of the Farm Bill, but, and this is a key difference, they would require, in order to do so, they would need all of the funding to stay within conservation programs, which is in line with NACD's position. And then they would also need for that funding to retain those climate sideboards. That's basically keeps that funding within practices that are proven to reduce or mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. One of the bigger things that the Senate is looking to do is to make some changes to the RCVP program. They're really looking at ways to make it more innovative and outcomes based. And then they're also, and the House is also looking at ways to do this too, but they're looking to simplify the program and make it less cumbersome for partners. And that's something that we, of course, advocate for in our Farm Bill requests. And then they're, like the House too, they're also looking to, expand access to TSPs. They're also, interested in that state soil health grant program, and a few other things. Again, the biggest, I think, dispute in the conservation title between the House and the Senate is set up to be how to handle that IRA funding. NACD has a clear position on this. We want this funding to stay within those conservation programs, and we would also like to see it integrated into the, what we call the baseline of the Farm Bill. So that's basically, that would increase the baseline level of funding for those programs like EQIP and CSP, and that would make it the new level of funding that would be considered in future Farm Bills. So it would be more of a permanent funding increase for those programs, which obviously we would support. And then, I think overall, and again, it is a little bit difficult to tell because the current drafts that the House and the Senate are working on aren't public yet, but our other priorities, within programs like CRP and RCPP, also seem to be making some significant headway. And ultimately, just went over some of the House and Senate's bigger priorities, but eventually they're going to release their bills, and they're going to have to come together and iron out the differences, and agree on one bill and ultimately pass it. So particularly on some of those issues that I touched on before that, outside of the conservation title that will require new funding, there's going to be, I think, some different disagreements over that. There'll likely be disagreements in how to handle the IRA conservation funding. So all those things could complicate the process, but eventually they'll have to figure those things out. And yeah, we'll just note that our staff, we've been in touch with both sides of both the House and Senate Ag Committee staff. Again, think our priorities are in a pretty solid place. Think there's good progress being made. But again, there's some bigger outstanding questions. So it's going to be a very exciting and fun few months. And just really hope that we are able to get something done before the end of the year and avoid something like we're experiencing now with the appropriations bills and a potential shutdown. So that is a very broad overview of where things are, and a kind of general update on how our team sees our priorities currently faring. But I will open it up for any questions or comments now.
Yeah, Chris. So when both sides release their bills, and you said that they got to come together and form one, at that point, will NACD be able to submit comments one way or the other, what we support?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there'll be multiple opportunities for us to weigh in, and I think we will definitely be doing that. So I think before then, let's say the House releases their bill first, we will we will take we'll have the opportunity to take public positions on different provisions in that bill, and then we'll also work with the committee staff to, if there are things we're concerned about, we'll obviously want to work with them to change what we can. And then, we on the other side of the coin, we'll express support for things and try to garner more support for things that we like about the bill. And we'll do the same thing on the Senate side. And then, yeah, there will be some, and I think, yeah, once the House and the Senate are working to conference the bills, that's when we will likely want to be vocal. Just really to support our priorities being included in that final bill. So I think both when we see the House and the Senate version come out, and then before that, and kind of during those conference negotiations is when we'll start to weigh in more. And Leanne had another question in the chat. She is asking about I had mentioned TSPs, and she was asking specifically what Congress is considering in regards to reforming that program. So basically, and Leanne, I can send this to any other folks that are interested too, but there is a bipartisan bill in the Senate. It's led by Senator Braun in Indiana, and the intent of the bill is to increase access to technical service providers. And it does that in a few different ways. It reduces timelines for NRCS to provide access to folks that apply for TSP services. And then it also allows for third-party providers to provide access to TSPs. I can send more info on that bill. NRCS is aware of it, and I know that they've provided comments in response, but that is something that we've heard, from members about, folks have voice support for just easier access to the TSP program. So that's something that we're monitoring, and we've been in touch with NRCS and those offices on. But again, that's something that both the House and the Senate are looking to include to some extent in their versions of the bill. And Leah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to your question.
No, thank you for that. And I know it's some, it's some heavy hitters, Land O'Lakes, which is millions and millions of dollars cooperative. And so with their technology and Truterra and different things like that. So I'm kind of curious about that as it evolves. I guess my second question would be, if the Inflation Reduction Act financial numbers get put into, which we've been advocating for, and I appreciate your position on this, into the Farm Bill, does that bump up against we call it in Minnesota the targets for each of the portions of the bill, the amount or the caps that Congress has agreed to fund these different titles, maybe is kind of what I'm getting at. So long story short, if they increase the Inflation Reduction Act numbers and put that into the Farm Bill, is there something else that gets pushed aside or lowered? Or I'm just trying to understand. I want it in the bill, but I don't want to lose the inflation reduction numbers. I'd rather just stream it out long term instead of this sharp trajectory that we're on with the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm just trying to figure out what's get cut, maybe if they don't actually put more into the conservation title, or are they going to put more in the conservation title?
Yeah, that's a good question. So basically it would work in that they would, there was $18 billion that was provided through that IRA bill for EQIP, CSP, RCPP, and ASAP. And I guess in simple terms, there's more complicated ways that they're considering this, like the committees you're working with CBO and the department to figure out exactly how this will work. But they could plug that in to the baseline funding for the Farm Bill. It wouldn't decrease. Really all that it would do is increase funding for those programs through the Farm Bill and make it more permanent, because the Farm Bill authorizations last for longer than the IRA funding is currently set to be spent. So there is a potential, and we don't have the exact numbers on this yet, that basically the Congressional Budget Office is saying you're not going to be able to spend this money over the period of time that the Farm Bill authorizes the programs. And again, I don't think we have a great understanding of this yet, but there might, and I think RCPP would be among one of the bigger ones, because that's where the majority of the IRA funding went. But that could be that and possibly some of the other programs could lose funding, a certain amount of funding if it was brought into the Farm Bill. Again, we don't have exact numbers on that yet, and I don't even know that the ag committees have the answer to that. But yes, that is a possibility and something that will definitely be taken into account as we're thinking about our ask there. Any other thoughts or questions on that update? Any of our priorities in the Farm Bill? Anything that you've heard that you have questions about? Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Libby here in a second to provide some more natural resource focused updates. But overall, it's been a really exciting past couple years. And as you know, I know that our leadership has talked about in over our recent summer meeting, and we've heard during board meetings and other NACD functions, is that it's a really exciting time for conservation generally, and for districts. And both that IRA funding, the partnership for climate smart commodities grant that NACD received, and districts all over the country are helping to administer. There's a lot of positive things happening in the conservation world, and a lot of things that districts can be proud of, and a lot of work ahead. And so, especially as we're looking at things like the Farm Bill, this is an exciting time to build on a lot of the progress that we've made. But just wanted to note that I feel like our district leaders have been doing a really excellent job, both with the opportunities we currently have, and for advocating for a lot of the things that are important to us in this Farm Bill. I know I saw Kim and Bill, who is an officer and also the chair of our Ledge Committee. Anyone, and I know, I'm not sure if Jeremy's still on there, but see another officer, Mark is. No pressure, but if you have any thoughts or comments to share on the Farm Bill or anything generally before we turn it over to Libby, feel free to chime in.
No, Chris, I don't have anything else to share. I think you did a very good job of covering everything. So thank you.
Great. All right. Well, I will turn it over to Libby then. She's going to talk a little about some fun developments that have been happening in the natural resource world.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to give an update on kind of ongoing things that we're keeping track of and have commented on over the past 5 months. A couple of rules that have come out. We had a proposed rule from BLM to add conservation as a use on public lands. Those are the lands primarily in the West, but not entirely. And we worked with various partners to develop comments. We had many conversations with policy advisors at BLM. The idea being, and just very brief background for those of you who don't work in that sphere, BLM manages public lands and allows various uses on those lands, such as grazing, resource extraction, recreation, and those are all covered by the Federal Land Policy Management Act. And so this proposed rule was to add conservation as one of those uses. Our comment and our subsequent conversations with BLM was that, we are always in favor of conservation, but we really need to recognize what impact that will have on current and future uses. Due to those comments and those conversations, BLM has committed to continuing outreach and continuing these conversations. We did have a workshop with Senior Policy Advisor Errol Rice at the summer meeting. Thank you for anyone who was able to attend that. It was a really great conversation around sort of some of the unintended consequences that this could have. And so we are following that. We have another meeting set for October just to sort of see where we're going. In that vein, BLM had also proposed a change to the grazing rule, which is separate from the Management Act, and they have since pulled back on that. And so those conversations are ongoing as well. And we'll keep you updated. And again, with any of these things, any comments that we have or requests for input will be an e-resource. And so if you have those coming in, I would suggest just kind of checking in on the government affairs section. And then more recently, Fish and Wildlife Service proposed adding language back in that was removed from the Endangered Species Act during the previous administration. And those changes were specifically for listing and delisting species requirements, designation of critical habitat requirements. The proposed rules proposed to reinstate blanket protections for threatened and endangered species, which ultimately ends up putting threatened species at the same level as endangered and sort of removes that distinction, which can be very difficult for people trying to figure out how to move forward within those various restrictions. We signed on to a comment that was drafted by NESARC, the National Endangered Species Act Review Committee. I'm not sure that's what NESARC stands for. I will check that real quick. But either way, their comments were extremely well written and just identified the redundancies that were contained, basically saying we don't need to add these in, these protections are already in place. And because of those concerns, Congressional Western Caucus and the Senate Western Caucus have proposed legislation to prevent any final rule from going into effect without truly identifying those redundancies and making sure to make it clear that they are not in line with the intended effect of the act. And so we are keeping an eye on that, kind of seeing where that goes. Fish and Wildlife Service hasn't responded to that legislation as of yet. Most agencies tend not to respond immediately when they have proposed rules out. And so we are keeping an eye on that. We did comment on that as well. And then the really fun one, I know there are some people on here who have heard about WOTUS more than they probably care to. Waters of the United States, just very brief history, was not originally defined in the Clean Water Act, and so has been defined by regulation and Supreme Court decisions since the Clean Water Act went into effect in 1972. Most recently, EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers finalized a rule earlier this year, and then there was a Supreme Court decision in a case called Sackett v. EPA that was about determining whether or not a wetland was considered adjacent to a federal water. Those waters of the U.S. are under federal jurisdiction. They were originally just traditionally navigable waters, and over the years, that definition has expanded. And so the most recent case, EPA and Army Corps amended the final rule to include the directive from the Supreme Court. And that directive is a wetland is only considered adjacent if there is a relatively permanent continuous surface connection. And that removes protections under federal law for a lot of wetlands, but the belief is that states will be able to step in and provide their own protections. Many states have. Some states have chosen to not take that on. And then in response to the rule earlier this year, 27 states filed suit. They are currently under injunction. And so they will be working, those 27 states will be working under a pre-2015 definition of waters of the United States. There's not that much difference between this current definition and the pre-2015 definition. And so it should provide more clarity, but we will have to see how implementation goes. But that final rule went into effect September 8th of this year. And so that is where we stand with waters of the United States. And again, just because it is a definition that changes at this point, every administration, it's something that we are keeping an eye on just to see sort of where we're going to go and whether or not we'll have another conversation about this in the next administration. But those are really just high level things that we're keeping an eye on. Like I said, anytime we address any of these proposed rules or make comments, we do include it in the resource. And so if there are any questions, you can check there, or I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. All right, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
All right. Anything, does that conclude your portion there, Libby?
Yeah, sorry, Chris. That's all I've got for you. So
There was,
like I said,
it was Leanne had another good question in the chat about a recently introduced bill that's focused on updating the adoption of NRCS's conservation practice standards list. We are aware of this bill. We've talked internally about it and with other stakeholders and with congressional offices. Overall, we see that as a positive bill. We think, just in talking with folks at NRCS and other conservation partners, that the bill would really kind of just facilitate the expansion of NRCS conservation practice standards list and allow for a little more innovation, and particularly at the local level. But importantly, and I think this is very importantly, we feel like it would do so in a way that protects the scientific integrity of those standards. Those practice standards are very heavily regulated, and I think for good reason. It's because NRCS and the conservation community is confident that they're effective in all different parts of the country. So ultimately, yes, that is we do see that as a positive bill. And I do know that that's something that's being considered by both the Senate and the House Ag committees, and it's a bipartisan bill. And yeah, I do. Thanks for the update on the BLM rule and WOTUS, Libby. I know that has been a tumultuous journey, as it always is, and I do know. I think our team has just heard that there's still a lot of uncertainty in how exactly that's going to be implemented. Libby is doing a really good job in tracking those developments, and she's clued in to different updates that EPA is providing, different guidance they're providing. So like she said, we'll continue to provide updates through things like eResource. But if you do have questions, again, please don't hesitate to shoot us an email and we'll get back to you. All right. Well, we're making good time. So those were the big things that we wanted to touch on. As always, unfortunately, I think a big theme in all these updates is there's a lot we don't know. Especially, I think the most pressing thing right now is these appropriations bills and Congress passing a CR to prevent a shutdown. And again, that is looking increasingly likely. Still possible for Congress to get their act together, so we really hope that can happen. But again, in the kind of broader picture, I think that especially in the current political climate that is very, and in many ways, rightly focused on, reducing deficits and controlling government spending, that our appropriations priorities are faring well. And then again, as I talked about, I think that many of our bigger farm bill priorities are in a good place too. And a big piece of that is because the IRA provided so much needed funding for those NRCS programs. I will make a final plug that if folks, generally, I know our team hears from lots of folks, so I appreciate that you're already doing this. But if you receive questions from offices about, your thoughts or stances on a particular bill, or you're going to be meeting with a federal representative and you'd like help preparing, we would be very interested in helping you. And that's, we of course encourage folks to share their, I know all our different members have different local priorities, and of course you should feel free to communicate those, but we'll be able to provide you the latest on, just where Congress is with these different bills, and, kind of the latest thinking on our priorities. So again, please do not be shy in reaching out to us. Okay. Wow. Well, we're all set to finish at exactly 1 o'clock on a Friday. So this is great. Any final thoughts or questions before we hop off here?
Thank you, Chris and Libby, for a great presentation. It really helps keep us updated. We appreciate the time you took to keep us all informed.
Yeah, that's same here. Thanks both of you. And I'd like to put in a plug again for the annual convention in San Diego. I hope everybody that's been on here can get to that. So just a reminder.
Thank you for that, Bill. I would have gotten in trouble for not mentioning that. All of the information for that meeting is on our website. We have a page dedicated to the annual meeting. We did a site visit with some NACD staff a while back. That was my first time in San Diego. It's beautiful. The hotel that we'll be staying at is great. There is going to be an event on the USS Midway. There's lots of cool stuff. So please get more info on our website about that. There's also someone just asked about another if we're going to schedule another update, and I think the answer is yes. I think we are going to shoot, just because there's so much going on especially in the farm bill and appropriate space, that I think we are going to do another one of these, and it's great that it was pretty well attended. All right, so I'll actually stop talking now. But thanks a lot for taking the time to come. Really good questions. We will be sharing more updates in the coming days. But again, if folks need anything, please feel free to reach out. All right. Thanks so much. Hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chris, Libby.